What I find really interesting
You're peddling
about...
lies, Tommy. You're
What
peddling lies.
I find really
Wait a minute, Shyster.
What I find really interesting about your organisation is I was looking at your website yesterday, and you're trying to say that you're a human rights organisation. I mean, I find that quite farcical. Basically, your organisation does peddle hate, you peddle misinformation. Last month, in March, 2 Asian men were beaten to a pulp by 4 men from Yorkshire who claim they sympathise with the EDL. They've actually gone to prison.
Where's the evidence?
Well, this is what they said. It actually was discussed in court. They've gone to prison.
Okay.
Now, 2 weeks ago in Salford, not that far from here, a black woman was walking in broad daylight, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She's pushing her child in a pram. A man racially abused her, used sexual language and threw acid at her. Well, now, racism is very much a reality of people's lives.
But Shyster, the other side of this is that, I suppose the question some people ask is, do the Muslim community need to do more to separate themselves from their extremist wings, Muslim communities? From their extremist wings, there are young men who want to kill their fellow Britons, there are those poppy burners. Now, what do you think of all those people?
I think they're extremists. I think they're an absolute disgrace, just like I think you're an extremist.
Okay. Well,
simple as that.
You talk about human rights. The European Court of Human Rights done an in-depth study in 2004, and they found that Sharia law is incompatible with Western freedoms and democracies due to their views on homosexuals, their views on women, and their views on infidels. That's all the non-Muslims over here.
But if you're a defender of liberal values, as you seem to be portraying yourself, why in a recent Channel 4 documentary did you throw items at the police and abuse an Asian security guard about Norway, and you were impersonating Anders Breivik?
No, you see,
why do your members wear is this true, toy pig masks and carry bacon? It's liberal values, it's hardly Shirley Williams,
I'm glad you pointed that out. When I had my hood up and I had goggles on, this is what we're up against as an organisation. I said ribbit because I looked like a frog, because I had goggles on and I was drunk. I didn't say Breivik, they put a subtitle as Breivik. I didn't say Breivik, I said ribbit. So and taken out of context, a lot of those things, if you know what the story behind what had happened, it's not the way it look.
What are these pig masks all about?
I don't know, I don't wear a pig mask. I don't wear a pig mask.
The point is more important than this, and I'll tell you why, Stephen, because firstly, within society, and one thing you're not recognising, you're worried about the Islamisation of this country.
Not just I'm worried.
No, it's okay. It's all right. Look, you're worried about the Islamisation of this country. You're worried about the Islamisation of Europe because of fear. Fear that doesn't need to exist. If you understood the Islamic contribution to this society, arts, science, maths, history, music, literature, hold on a second, the Renaissance.
Look at all these Islamic countries where Christians are being persecuted and massacred.
You cannot judge
on 44 other countries.
You cannot judge, Stephen, you cannot judge a religion by the misguided actions of a few individuals.
It's not a few individuals, it's 44 countries. It's 44 countries, and we're here talking about the far right. Can someone define far right to me, please?
The old politics.
Can you define far right?
Matt's one of the experts on that very thing.
Right, there are 2 key things that far-right groups share. Okay, firstly, they reject or they undermine what representative liberal democracy is all about. Now, a liberal representative democracy accepts that a plurality of views is legitimate. We should support those views. We should allow those views. Okay, and I think what many people would feel is that your organisation and the way in which you campaign is automatically discounting the views of Muslims and the rights of Muslims to hold those views. But secondly, what far-right groups share, I mean, I'm sure you would say you're not the same organisation as, say, I don't know, the American Nazi Party, right? Because there's a lot of variation within those parties. Hold on. Yeah. But what they also share, ultimately, is a rejection of human equality. And I would guess that many people who are watching the show would feel that your organisation is no longer talking about militant Islam. You're just talking about Muslims.
Okay, well, you'd say
I'll bring Jamie and Abra in a second.
You'd say far right. I say we've got a Sikh division.
I don't have to be a
Jewish division, a Hindu division. And excuse me, sorry, and Matthew's an expert on the far right, yeah? Matthew, you're from Kettering. 98% Christian. You was brought up in Kettering.
No, I wasn't.
Where was you brought up?
Chiswell Green.
Chiswell Green. Well, what's the population of Muslims there? It's non-existent.
I live in Manchester. I'm
more than familiar with what I'm saying is where you've been brought up, there's been no Muslims, there's been no immigration. Where I've been brought up, when your children go to a school where other children at that school's fathers are teaching them hatred due to their Islamic extremist views, then you can be an expert. Because all these experts which are doing all these studies and reading all these books, they're out of touch with reality.
Jamie Bartlett, are you out of touch? Are too many politicians out of touch with what he perceives as his reality? Tommy Robinson.
I think so. I mean, I think clearly one of the reasons groups like the English Defence League and all across Europe, various forms of far-right parties are growing, is partly a feeling that especially left-wing parties that should have been representing the working class no longer really understand what it's like to live actually in a multicultural society. I mean, Tommy can say, you know, I live in Luton, I know what it's actually like, you're from Westminster, you've actually got no idea. But the question here is about whether we're complacent. You know, for all the bluster that Tommy and the EDL can present each week, and they get lots of media coverage, there's not actually many of them. Most of them are online on Facebook and on forums and all the rest of it. They can't really get more than 400 or 500 people out in the streets. Look at the BNP in the UK. Polls, what, 1%, 2%? And look what happens across the rest of Europe. In France, the Front National are polling at 20%.
This is really key, isn't it? There never really has been. Mosley in the 30s had a sort of brief shining moment, if you want to call it that, but nothing much beyond that. There's been no tradition of electoral success in this country for far-right parties.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of that has to do with the system that we have. I mean, we are just as concerned as our European neighbours about the core far-right issues, and I don't think those issues should be dismissed or discounted. I think those issues need to be talked about, and that is probably the only point of convergence that you and I would have. But I would also say, in Britain particularly, because of the failure of parties like the BNP and before the BNP, the National Front, we've tended to be extra dismissive about the far right. We've dismissed supporters of the far right as a lunatic fringe who don't deserve to have their grievances talked about, and I don't necessarily think that's
because we're not far right that we've been successful. It's because people don't want to vote for the BNP and groups like that, because the average person that's joined the English Defence League is an average man.
There's quite a lot of crossover between the two, isn't there? Between the BNP and the EDL, there's quite a lot of crossover.
Well, I mean, the reality of the situation is the type of narratives that these parties are offering around Islam and around immigration are very similar. Jamie's study has shown that EDL supporters are not just concerned about Islam, they're concerned about immigration more generally.
I think a lot of people are concerned about immigration more generally.
Abba, do you want to come in here? And then the guy in a second.
I've a huge problem with the way the debate's been defined at the moment, because the implication seems to be that there needs to be some sort of proactive steps taken by government to stop people from expressing their opinions. This is effectively what we're talking about. You can't say this because I don't agree with you, and every opportunity that the EDL is taking to express themselves, the reaction is so strong to this. Well, actually, what we should be asking is, why does the EDL exist in the first place? I mean, why is it that these people feel so disenfranchised that they have to look to the EDL rather than their local Labour councillors or Liberal Democrat councillors or whatever party? There is a deficit here in terms of representing what these people's views are. Whether or not you agree with them or not, we live in a democracy. The idea is that people are able to express their opinions, whatever they may be.
Precisely, that's fair enough. And as we said earlier on, there are people who have these concerns to a greater or lesser extent.
These concerns that we've thrown our lives into, remember, we're all volunteers. The English Defence League, we don't get paid for anything.
There are legitimate issues, and they need to be discussed.
What are those legitimate issues in your mind?
There are of course, there's legitimate issues on race, on immigration, on all those issues. The point is, across Europe, these issues are being manipulated by mainstream parties. They are being manipulated. There's definitely an increase in far-right activity.
When you say far-right,
across Europe, and this is very, very dangerous.
Finish. I'll come back to you in a second.
This is very dangerous. Of course, there needs to be a legitimate debate in this country. It needs to be an accurate debate. Let's talk accurately. Let's not stoke up hatred. Let's not use misinformation. That's
what would you like? What would you like? This is a really important question. What would you like the Muslim communities in this country, and they come in as many different forms, what would you like them to do?
Integrate and assimilate. That's all we want. Integrate and assimilate.
And what does that mean for you? How can you define
and when you say you can't call everyone who opposes anything to do with Islam far right, it's not right. You can't.
What do you mean by integrate and assimilate? How would that manifest? How would that look?
Well, what I'd say is, my
mum
was an Irish immigrant to this country. Yeah. Well, if you go to Luton, half my best mates are West Indians. How come the Jews, the Sikhs, the Hindus, the West Indians, everybody is integrated? There's no problem. There's no commotion. You just spoke about 2 racist incidents last week. 38 girls on Friday in court in Oxford. 12 Muslim men and 38 children aged 11 to 14 are being abused and raped. This
sexual perverts come in all races.
But not in the same, not in the same organisation.
Let's be...
Audience in a minute.
When are Muslims going to take to the streets in outrage against their fellow Muslims for what they're doing?
Let's be clear about 2 or 3 issues.
Audiences in a minute.
The first issue is this. If there are criminals, they are criminals, and their religion and their race and their ethnicity has got nothing to do with it. That is the first... No, hold on. You've had a fair shout. Secondly, within Islam, we have women's rights, we have men's rights, and we have rights for children. We are very moral, and we are quite conservative on these issues, OK? Now, your idea of assimilation, I assume would mean that I shouldn't have a beard, wear a hat, or walk round in this robe. Is that right?
No, it's not. And the same with the hijab. No one has no problem. You had a debate on here the other day where you're talking about the burqa. Why should the burqa be banned? Yeah. No one said what needed to be said. In my hometown, there's been 4 armed robberies by people wearing burqas. That's enough of a reason to ban.
What would you like Mo, for example, or Shaista, for example, to do differently from what they're doing at the moment? In what way would you like them to live their lives differently?
Mo works with the Muslim Council of Britain, don't you?
I work with a number of different organisations.
Affiliated to the Islamic Forum of Europe. All these organisations that you work with, you're affiliated with, either drabble off money to charities that fund extremism, or Islamist organisations.
That is a slander, and there's no evidence about that.
So you're not affiliated on page 22 of the Muslim Council of Britain with the Islamic Forum of Europe, who are named as an Islamist organisation.
Tommy, the fact of the matter is that the government, this issue is about complacency with your organisation. Now, we can argue about what the definition of far-right and Nazism is,
the fact is we're not far-right.
We have scholars and studies today saying that the rhetoric and the language used by your organisation is in parallel with the anti-Semitism that came in the 1930s before the Holocaust.
Tommy, listen, you'll have another chance. Well, I know you weren't a point about there was lots of pro-Israeli flags at the demo yesterday, which itself is an interesting phenomenon. This is an interesting development in the
I think the debate's quite characteristic of all of this. You know, I don't think that the English Defence League is actually that big, and I don't think it's going to get hugely bigger. It does represent a lot of grievances that people have, of course, and actually just the idea of getting out on the streets and actually doing something is quite appealing. But the fact is that the way that the media landscape has changed so much in the last 5 or 10 years has meant that Tommy's always reading stories about Sharia law about to be introduced into Luton or anywhere else, and other people are reading stories about the English Defence League, and it becomes very, very polarised very, very quickly. So because the English Defence League is predominantly an online organisation, they send each other links of stories and essentially whip themselves up constantly.
They get groupthink.
Groupthink, and sort of based on some misinformation.
Well, there's many of us that are guilty of groupthink. Let's, Guy, let's get a microphone over. Good morning.